Hello everyone, welcome to another video. In our last video in this series, we were introducing the term strings or text in Java. So now that we've learned what strings are and how they can be used in Java, we are going to talk about how you can work with them inside of your program using string methods. So as we covered in the last video, strings are objects that belong to the string class that's built into the Java language. So the text is the data, while your methods are the actions. So the methods will be doing some sort of action on the text or the string. Now, I keep referring to a class, that a string is an object of uh, the string class. So just to give you an idea of what that means, think of a class as a blueprint for a type or a data type, and it defines what that type can do. So every string that you create is going to be based on the string class that is defining what that object or that string can do. So before we continue, there's one important thing to note, and that is that strings are immutable. This means once a string is created, it cannot be changed or modified. So any method that looks like it changes a string actually is just creating a new string. So that is something to note as we move forward. The original string will always stay the same, but the method will just change the way that original string appears. But again, it's returning to you a totally different string. So since string is a class, each string has built-in actions you can use with it. And that would be what we call a string method, which are actions that you can do with strings. And methods will allow you to do certain things with the text or the string that you're working with in your code, such as inspect it, modify it, and extract it. So when you want to actually work with a string method, you would have to call it. Basically, make a request for it. So here is the basic standard for calling a string method. Now this is assuming that your string that you're working with is already being stored as a variable. So let's say you have a string variable and it has a name. In this case, you would say variable name dot method name. And again, the methods are actually already built in for you, which we'll cover a little later on. But when you do this, it's pretty much saying that this variable can have this action, or this variable needs to perform this action. And it's very important that you always make sure that at the end of that method name that the parentheses are used. Because if you forget the parentheses, your code will not run as you expect it to. Now, let's look at some common string methods. So the first one that is commonly used is .length. And this is used if you're trying to understand how long this string is or how many characters are in this string. So we'll count the letters, numbers, and the spaces, even down to the punctuations that are in a string. So pretty much it's counting every index within the double quotes. So if you take a look at the examples we have here, you see the first example, we have a variable word that's holding hello. The second one, we have a variable name holding Alex Johnson. In both examples, we're using word.length. In the first example, with the string word, we're basically creating another variable and we're using or storing the value of the length to a data type of int. Because if you use .length method, it's going to return a integer or a number back to you, which is why you would have to store the output of this method to a actual int data type. Now there may be a case where you don't necessarily want to store the actual number value or the number, the length, I should say, of a string, but maybe you just want to print it out to see it. And in that case, you could do the same thing. And in this example, you see we do name.length. Now, take note of both examples. At the end of .length, there are empty parentheses behind both of them. Remember, the parentheses are important and should always be included for your methods to run properly, regardless of what that method name is and how it's used. So, just a refresher, we learned about string indexes. And remember, these indexes in Java start at 0, but they're used to tell us the position of a specific character in a string. And again, the last character of the string is always going to be length minus 1. So you can use the length method minus 1 to always access the last character of your string. Now we're going to get into some other methods that exist. One is dot to uppercase, and this is going to be used if, for example, you want to have all the letters of the string become uppercase. And remember, the original string does not actually change. For example, the first variable we have is name, and it's holding Alex Johnson. The second variable we have is loud name, and you see that it is using the original string, Alex Johnson, which is being stored in name, and it is applying the to uppercase method to it. Now, although we are applying the dot or the dot to uppercase method to it or to uppercase method to it, the original string of name is not changing. All that's happening is a new string is being created and being stored in loud name. So again, strings are immutable, and in this case, name or Alex Johnson will continue to live in our code pretty much until we erase that line of code from our program. And similarly to our to uppercase method, you have the to lowercase method, which will pretty much give you back a new string with all letters lowercase. Now, you would typically use a dot to lowercase or a dot to uppercase if you are trying to control the user's input and you're trying to make it easier on yourself to ensure that regardless of how the user inputs information, whether they use one or two uppercase letters in their input or if they use two lowercase letters, regardless of the formatting of the characters they use, that you can use it how you intend to. So typically this is used in those cases, and it may make a little bit more sense later on when we get into some more complex topics in Java. Another method you can use is .char@, method, which basically allows you to return a character from a string, but the character that is being returned is going to be based on the index given to this method. Now, the index you give to this method is going to go inside of those empty parentheses that you've seen previously at the end of the methods. And this is a value you would give to the method to say, hey, this is the character I want to get at this index. So if you take a look at the example, we have a variable called name, which hold Alex. And in our print statement under it, you see the print statement says name dot char at parentheses 0. So basically this is saying that we want to print out the character that is at the 0 index of the variable name, and in this case it is A. So if there is a situation where you want to either check the character at a certain position or see a character at a certain position, then this is one that could be useful to you. Now, speaking on accessing characters from your Java code or your data, there is a term which some people will hear or mention to you in Java, which is called slicing. And slicing is pretty much what you imagine it to be. Imagine yourself slicing something into pieces. You can slice a big piece, you can slice a little piece, you can slice it multiple times. So slicing means that we are taking various pieces of a string or a piece of a string. And to use the slicing in Java, you would use the substring method. And this will allow you to slice your string into different values. So to give you an idea, let's say you wanted to only access the letters in a certain range. So in the screenshot you see here, it's saying it wants to access the letters from 0 to 4. And I know you're probably taking a look at this and you're saying, well, 4 ends at J. Yes, it does, technically. But the way you're going to use the substring method does not consider it to be all of those. And it'll make more sense when we get into the substring method. So your substring method is going to return a new string to you containing only a part of the original string. And again, this is going to use the indexes to decide how to start or stop. Now there's technically two ways you can do it. The first way is just by saying where you want your string slicing to start at. So what index or what character should it start at? Or you can actually tell your program where it should start and where it should end when using the substring or slicing your string. So when you're using substring start method, you would basically tell the program the index you want to start at. And it will start at that position and pretty much go through the rest of the string and include whatever's after that index. So if you take a look at this example, we're saying substring 2, and pretty much what will happen in your code is it's going to find the index at substring 2 or the index at 2, which in our case is going to be L. So it's then going to start at that second position and take every character after it and return it to you as a new string. So the output in this case will be LLO. Now, if you were to use the other way of using the substring method, which would be using the start and the end index, it's a little bit different. So the start will stay the same. The start is going to find the first, or it's going to find the character at that start index, but the end index is a little tricky. So when you are using the end index, it does not actually include the end index. It actually stops one index before the end index. So if you take a look at the example we looked at earlier, here we have Alex Johnson again. Now, if you take a look, in the substring, we're saying substring 0 and 4. That means we are going to start at 0 which is the A. And we are then going to go 4 spots. So when I mean 4 spots, counting from 0, A would be 1, L would be 2, E would be 3, and X would be 4. So it's counting from that position. Now, this is kind of where it gets confusing, as I stated, because technically your index does not include the 4th actual character. And remember, your index starts at 0, but to kind of give you an idea, when you're working with your substring, it has what you can say let's say an imaginary blinker. So if you say you want to start at the very beginning of that index, your imaginary blinker starts at the beginning of that that character. So we'll start in front of A. If you go at 1, then it will start at the L. So that's already 2 characters. You start at the E, that's 3 characters. You start at the X, that's 4 characters. However, we're not actually reaching the 4th character index value because that imaginary blinker never actually reaches it in time. So although this is one of those concepts that no matter how people explain it, it's just one of those things that people just know that whatever that last index is with your substring is always going to be the index before that actual index that you provide. So if you know, for example, you want a specific range or a specific character to come out, just take that into consideration when working with it. But again, when you work with it in a live demo, it may click a little better. Another similar method is the index of method, but this method is actually going to be used if you're trying to find where a specific character or word is within your actual string. So think of it as a way to search through the string for something. And it's actually going to return to you the index value of where it's appearing in your code first. So there may be a case where you're searching for something and it doesn't appear at all. And in those cases, your return value will always be -1 if it's not found. But for the most part, if it can be found, it will provide the index where it first finds that character or first finds that word in the correct sequence. So if you take a look at the example, again, we have our variable name that's holding Alex Johnson, and we're saying that we want to print out name.index of John. So we basically saying we want to print out where the word John in our string begins, which is at the index of 5. So this is a good way to search and return information to your code. Now, dot equals method is when you actually want to compare 2 strings. So remember, you cannot use the equal sign when you're working with strings because the equal sign means that you are assigning a value, just like when we're creating a variable. So you can't use the equal sign because it will think that you are trying to assign a value to something. And in this case, we're not assigning a value to anything. We're trying to compare to see if they are equal to each other. So we would use the dot equals method. And it's pretty much going to allow you to see if the text is the same between 2 different strings. Now in this example we have a variable A and B. They both contain the string hello. And in our print statement we're basically saying string 1 dot equals string 2. So we're placing one of the strings in the parentheses and we're calling the method to another string. So if you're trying to see if B is matching A, then you would do A dot equals B. And this is going to return to you a Boolean value, meaning it's only going to return true or false to you, as you see in this example output. There also may be a case when you're working with a user's input and they may have put extra spaces into the input that you don't want or that will cause issues to your program. And there is a way to help you clean that up, which is the dot trim method. So the dot trim method is actually used to remove any leading or trailing spaces that are within a string. So one thing to note is it will actually leave spaces inside of the string untouched, meaning if it's between characters, it's not going to be removed. However, if it is spaces that are before the start of characters or after the characters have ended, it's going to get rid of it. So if you take a look at the example, in the string input we have there, you see that there's extra spaces between the word hello and after the word hello. So if you wanted to get rid of that and just simply have hello with no spaces, then you would say the variable name dot trim, and that would automatically remove any of that extra space. So if you take a look at the screenshot to the right, you see there's those two spaces before and after using the dot trim, it would pretty much just say hello with no spaces at all. Another method you can use is dot replace. This one is going to be used if you want to replace a character or a substring in a string. So how do you use it? First, you would use the dot replace method, and it's going to take in two data points. The first one is going to be the word that needs to change. The second one is going to be the new word that it will be changed to. And this is separated by a comma. So if you take a look at the example, you see text is holding the string I like cats. Now we have another variable called new text, and it's basically saying that we want to apply the replace method onto the string text, and we want to replace in the string anywhere that it says cats to dogs. So if you were to run this code and print it out, new text would return to you I like dogs. And remember, strings are immutable. So because we have a new string being returned to us from the method, technically we will have two strings, one that will say I like cats and one that says I like dogs. So again, although we are changing the word, that original string still lives in your program until it is deleted by you. The starts with method can be used if you want to check to see if a string begins with a given text. So if you're trying to see, hey, did this user enter this string? If so, let's use it this way. Or if you're trying to search for something as well. So in the example, you see that we have a variable called file that's holding report.pdf. And in the print statement, we're pretty much saying that we want to take file and we want to complete the action of the starts with method on it. And we're basically saying that we want to search to see if that string starts with REP. So our output in this case is true because it does start with REP. However, if you were to have a capital R in the starts with method, then it would return false because in this case, the value that is stored to file does not start in a capital R, it starts with a lowercase r. So it would say that it does not find that file. So it is case sensitive again. So just keep that in mind. And that is a case where utilizing the to uppercase or to lowercase could be useful if you were to use this method, for example. Similarly to the starts with method, you have the ends with method, and that's just allowing you to check the end of a string for a specific text. Again, the same rules apply to the starts with, except it's going to search to see if it ends with a certain string. So to kind of give you an overview of all of those commonly used string methods, this is kind of how you can break those down. So if you want to do any inspection on text, you can do length, char at, index of, or contains. If you're trying to transform text, you can do to lowercase, to uppercase, replace, or trim. If you're trying to extract certain pieces of text from a string, you can use the substring method, either using only the start index or using the start and end index. If you're looking to compare strings, you can use dot equals, and there's another method called dot equals ignore case, which will ignore the case or uppercase or lowercase. And then you also have your cases when you're working with strings where you're trying to check the beginning and the ending of it, which it starts with and ends with. Now, these are some methods you can use. There are a lot of methods out there that you can use that I have not mentioned, but I didn't want to make this a very long video, so by showing you the most commonly used ones that you will probably need to utilize and or memorize, I figured that will be a lot better for you to pick up on the concepts more. Again, as you get more advanced in this, I do always recommend that you continue to explore the rest of the string methods that exist out there. But in this case, to not confuse you, I'm only sticking to the ones that are most commonly used that would be good for you to memorize on your own. So overall, these are some of the common ones that we covered in this video. Again, most of these are going to be very useful when you are looking to do any transformations or change the way your data appears in your programs. And we will utilize some of these in the coding tutorial so it makes sense of how to actually apply them to your text. So overall in this video, we have now covered the basics you need to know for strings and working with them, which is by applying string methods to them. Again, there are a lot of string methods out there, more than what I have covered here. Again, I would also recommend that you do some research on your own to see which other ones are out there. But this is a good start for you to start working with your text in your programs a little more and start seeing the different things you can do in Java. So if this video was a little confusing to you and how you would apply methods, please make sure that you watch the string methods and the string coding tutorial after this video. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in that coding tutorial.